Remember, the reading of the national budget is expected to take place on Thursday next week. It's going to be on the 12th of June, and of course this is going to coincide with the rest of the members of the East African community. Well, to put life into the numbers, I'm joined by Rachel Jogona, an Associate Director at Ernst & Young. Thank you very much indeed, Rachel, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And
next to Rachel, we have Robert Kamwara. He's a taxation lawyer, joining us tonight as well. Thank you very much indeed, Kamwara, for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
I want first of all to start with Rachel. I mean, you saw the estimates that were tabled by the Budget and Appropriations Committee. You know, a little bit of a realignment here and there. You know, tabling estimates of about 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings. What is your reaction to these?
My first reaction is that we seem to be on an onward trend. I mean, in terms of our budget, we keep going up. Mm-hmm. And remember, this is what the government plans to spend. But do we have a commensurate growth in terms of the revenue-raising measures? For me, I find it there's some contrast somewhere, but maybe once we look at the revenue-raising measures, then mm-hmm. we'll see whether the gap will be breached. Mm-hmm. Yes.
You're highlighting the fact that, you know, out of the 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings that Kenya plans to spend in the fiscal year 2025-2026, only 3.32 trillion shillings will be raised by Kenya Revenue Authority, and these are projections, they're not the actuals. Do we still continue to live beyond our means? Is that how you feel?
Absolutely. Actually, when you look at the projected revenue collection of 3.3 trillion shillings, remember even FY24, we are still at 2-point-something trillion. Mm-hmm. So when we say that we're going to collect upwards of 3 trillion, then I think we're living beyond our budget, to be sure. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Kamwara, what is your take on the estimates tabled by the Budget and Appropriations Committee yesterday?
Well, the budget analysis that many have tried to bring out brings different puts it in a different way, puts the statistics differently. However, I would say the budget is fairly, we can say it's fairly sizable. Mm-hmm. And why I say that is because we are a growing economy. By the day, the population is growing. We're not having the same population we had 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we don't expect to still be consuming the same amount that we're consuming many years back. We have the Vision 2030 that is in place. We have the bottom-up economy that has its own estimates. So we can only work with what we have. We can only make good of what we have, and maybe not complain so much that the budget is too big for us. Maybe now start thinking of how we can expand our abilities, mm-hmm. so that we can be able to fetch as much as possible to sustain the budget. Mm-hmm.
You know, there has been a lot of hue and cry with part of the proposal to amend Section 59A(1)(b) of the tax procedures and give the Kenya Revenue Authority, you know, powers to check your personal data using mobile phone transactions and so much. What is your opinion on this?
There is the much that you can protect up to a certain point as an individual, and your rights end up to where you start infringing other people's rights. Mm-hmm. However, I think it would be extreme that KRA would wish to have a limitless or a bottomless access to your data, considering we have a lot of trade secrets that every business has. Mm-hmm. And just letting it out to anybody or just letting it out to KRA to access may jeopardize on people's business. Mm-hmm. So my take on Section 59 needs to be scrutinized a bit more and debated better, and a decision made on whether it will go as it is or a bit of realignment on it to be done. Mm-hmm. This was previously said in the previous budget, and you can remember it was heavily opposed even by the lawmakers, and I don't see why we keep sneaking it back every now and then in the budgets. Yes.
I know the issues of data, they are very sensitive and they're protected by the data privacy law. But, for an institution like the Kenya Revenue Authority, why would anybody be having a challenge if Kenya Revenue Authority is once in a while checking to see what kind of transactions you are making, and are they commensurate with the kind of taxes that you are paying?
Well, there is procedure that needs to be followed. So you'll not just come and ambush me and say, I want to have a look at the patents that you have, the intellectual property information that you have, want to see all your bank statements. Fine, they may want to ask for relevant information that relates to financial information, but access to any information that you have in your business, it may open up a can of worms and people start looking at things that are not necessary.
Isn't that like, trying to create some level of transparency and accountability in ensuring that people pay taxes or people pay the required taxes that they are supposed to pay?
As you said, once again, some of these things are not related. So if you want to look at for example, you want to look at my patents, or you want to look at my copyrights, or you want to look at some of my trade secrets, which as a company director I could be having, looking at all my company minutes. And for some companies, we're talking about international companies that could be parent companies and others are subsidiaries. What would be the benefit, or what would be the intention of looking into all this data and information if actually you're not trying to be malicious?
Rachel, I mean, in a country which has almost 58 million people and less than 3.5 million taxpayers, I mean, isn't it then a conscious decision that we ought to make as a nation and try to find out why do we still have a very small tax base in a country with close to 60 million people? And then why should we deny the Kenya Revenue Authority access to our data just to find out who is paying and who is not paying?
This is a very broad discussion, and I tend to believe with my colleague Robert here in terms of to what extent do we give access to KRA, because from a procedural point of view, the tax laws provide for documentation that a taxpayer needs to provide to the to the Revenue Authority for purposes of ascertainment of the income and anything else that the Revenue Authority would want to see. In some cases, when you look at trade secrets, as Robert says, I mean, those ones would really not be required for tax purposes. And I agree with you, we need to expand the tax base, because what we've seen over the years is that we have over-concentration on the formal sector, number one, or the registered taxpayers. In my view, when you look at it in Kenya, and when you look at it broadly, even from an African perspective, like income taxes from individuals, 90% of that tax is paid by employers on account of employees. Whereas we have so many other people, like the high net worth individuals. You will find that their transactions, like the imports, they import the vehicles they are driving, do not meet or are not commensurate with the tax returns they are filing with the Revenue Authority. So for me, the data that KRA needs to look at is from maybe that perspective, look at what this high net worth individual is filing in terms of a tax declaration, and look at other information that they're filing with the same Revenue Authority. For instance, the car they imported and the tax they declared in the same year. That's the way I would look at it, but not looking at personal data that may not have any relevance to the tax declarations. Yeah.
I know, the Constitution is very clear on Article 31, and of course the Data Protection Act of 2019, I mean, it talks about the procedures to be followed if an institution wants to access your data, and one of them is getting a court order. But also look at it this way. I mean, we live in a country whereby close to 90% of the population, they work in the informal sector. And so they're not within the tax bracket. So then how should we then bring these people into the tax bracket, Robert?
Well, I think now you're talking about actually expanding of the tax base and looking at how our system is organized. We need to look at a way that we can be able to incorporate most of these people who are leaving school. We have a lot of school leaving students who need to be embraced in the market that is there. And the easiest way is to bring them in areas like manufacturing. You realize that if a sector like manufacturing is well supported in the country, it tends to employ more people. Considering that we don't have a lot of advancement in technology like in the Western world, we are in a situation where we can be able to absorb so many people. At the end of the day, what will happen, we'll end up paying pay-as-you-earn, and everybody will end up paying something small in terms of taxes. Unlike it is right now, most of the Form 4 school leavers are ending up being border riders. Yeah. You'll be shocked that you're getting a border rider down in Kangema, and the man tells you he's a graduate of the University of Nairobi. So what we need to do in terms of expanding the tax base is look at some of the key areas like manufacturing and areas like agriculture that can be able to absorb more people. Maybe something worth noting is that our budget as it is right now, 75% of our budget has been allocated on 5 areas. And if you look at those 5 areas, are they areas that we can say are meant to manage the tax base or improving on collection of taxes? Number 1 is education. About 660 billion shillings has been allocated to education. The second one is security. The third one is roads. The fourth one is health. Now, I just did a bit of an analysis compared with other nations, developed countries like the UK and the US. The number 1 allocation of the budget is social protection. What maybe in our setting we may talk of maybe something like health, because it's more to do with social security, and definitely what is normally paid to social security. Then there is health, then education. In the US, we talk of social security, health, and security. Now, why do we have to allocate 425 billion shillings to security in our country, Kenya? We are not at war. Maybe those who are experts in security may tell us more, but you realize the allocation on very sensitive areas like tourism, where we would say those are low-hanging fruits. During the Vision 2030 preparation of the Vision 2030, we saw tourism as a potential to bring us foreign exchange. Remember, some of the strategies we have in our tax policies is to ensure that we capitalize on such things like foreign exchange. So are we able to bring in more foreign exchange using the strategy that we have put in terms of our budget? I think we have very little allocation on things like tourism, for example. Tourism has been merged together with sports and culture, and only 32 billion shillings is allocated to it.
But because we need to take a short break here and then we come back. But also even in your analysis, I mean, it's also good to compare apples with apples and apples and not oranges. I mean, the countries that you are comparing Kenya with in terms of their HDI or Human Development Index, I mean, they're way above Kenya. These are countries that have invested in the educational system more than 100 years ago. We are still evolving. You walk to some parts of this country, you still see mad world schools or classrooms. You still see pupils, studying outside. They don't have any form of classroom. And so does it then cause to evaluate our needs and, of course, invest in those needs?
A good question.
I want you to respond to that once we come back, because we are taking a short break. I mean, if you're just joining us, you're watching the Prime Edition, and of course we are trying to unpack the numbers and the figures in the 2025-26 budgetary estimates that were tabled in Parliament yesterday. A short break is well deserved, and thereafter we are back with more. Welcome back. We're in the company of Rachel Juguna, an Associate Director at Ernst & Young, and Robert Kamwara, who is a taxation law expert, joining us and guiding us in this conversation. Before we went for the break, Kamwara, I just wanted to find out from you, I mean, when you compare US, Kenya, and UK, I mean, aren't you doing Kenya injustice? You're talking about countries, you know, whose education has evolved for, like when you look, for example, at UK, the educational system, I mean, it dates back to more than 500 years. Look at the US, I mean, more than 200 years. Ours is still very young.
True.
Shouldn't we be asking ourselves, where are we investing our education, I mean, our budget in?
Maybe that's a question that we now go back 10 years, as we were discussing during the short break, that for the last 10 years or so, we've always been saying education is given #1 budget. So the allocation of this has been very high over the years, but as we were asking ourselves, within our own locality, where we live, how many new schools have been developed? How many new institutions have come up, maybe institutions of higher learning? Very few. So the question remains, even us at home, even as parents, how much have you spent over the years trying to pay school fees and paying education, for buying books for your children? The expenditure has been high. So the question will remain, is our budget on education being properly spent? And if we can ask ourselves that question, then we may be able to get a solution to some of these problems that we are having, because our budget for education is growing. It's true, our population is growing. We cannot compare ourselves with the countries like US and UK, where children are not as many. But something needs to be done.
Rachel, you know, Kamwara is raising a very fundamental question. I mean, every year, we continue to pump billions of shillings into various sectors, from agriculture to manufacturing to education. Do we take time to ask ourselves, what is our return on investment as a country?
I don't think so, and I think it's time. It's high time as a country we ask ourselves those hard questions, like what you were asking about education. Every year we're pumping a lot of money into that sector, and for me, I'm not worried about the amount of money that we are pumping, but over the years, what can we show for that huge investment? #1, in the 21st century, we find that students are learning under trees. That is something that's shameful for a country. And then the other thing about uncoordinated financing in the education center. You find sector. You find an MP maybe has bursary money to finance education. You find that maybe even the woman member of parliament has another allocation, and I think the question is, where is this money being spent? What are the results of the huge capital expenditure? When you turn to the other side of maybe irrigation, you find that over the years we've been, funding some irrigation schemes in Tana River and some other counties. Galana Kulalu. Every year, actually, you find the minister who read about Galana Kulalu. So I think it is a high time that we took stock of the investments. Do we need to go on? Because as a business, if it was your personal business, you will decide, do I continue or do I not continue? And
this is the role that Parliament is supposed to play. And that's why the Constitution gave the Budget and Appropriations Committee powers to reallocate and reassign resources to critical sectors. But when you look at the way Parliament is constituted and the way it is playing this mandate, are you convinced that it is doing it the right way? I'm not convinced, because that oversight role, I think they're not really doing what as Kenyans we expect, because what I saw is just a reallocation here. There are very small amounts that they're removing from this, vote head to the next. But I think what I thought they would do is ask the hard questions. Ask the hard questions. I didn't see that coming. And maybe it's the politics of the day that are playing out, but hard questions need to be asked. And for you, hard questions would be like what? Like, let's see, like investment in agriculture, for example. We've been pumping money to that Galana Kulalu. Do we need to invest more? Do we need to go elsewhere? Do we need to look at what Israel is doing, for example? What else can we borrow from? And do we need to hold people accountable for whatever responsibilities that we've given them? Yes, Kamara.
Yes, and on the issue of accountability, we also talk about governance, and this is where we talk about audit. What is our budget allocation on audit? Because if these are the key sectors, last year health and education were key sectors, are we spending some time and some resources to ensure that audit is being done, because the Auditor General has complained over the period of not having a proper allocation in her budget for purposes of audit. So that would be important to ensure that there is a bit more of transparency, governance is improved to ensure that people can make good use of the money. One more thing that I noted in education, we may be spending a lot on brick and mortar, as we may be saying. We may be spending a lot on textbooks and pens and paper. However, have we thought that the world is moving towards a different trajectory? We're moving towards technology, use of AI. Some of these things are key, and we may not want to overlook. We may think that we are still, as you said, we are still comparing ourselves with the big boys, but actually that's why we should be comparing ourselves with.
And I like the fact that you are bringing in the question of, yes, we may want to invest in education, but what kind of investment, what kind of education are we investing in? Look, I mean, when you look at the last 10 years, I mean, education has always topped, budgetary allocation in this country. We continue to churn out millions of graduates every year. They don't get any job. Out of the 1 million graduates who leave school, only 200,000, will get employed. The other 800 are not getting employed. And so the question we should also be asking ourselves is, what kind of education are we investing in? But I also want to hear this from you. So when the architects of the Constitution were having in mind a situation whereby Parliament will be given more oversight when it comes to budgeting and allocation of resources, what did they have in mind? I mean, is it high time that we started, questioning the credentials of the people who are members of the budgetary budget and appropriations committee to see that they qualify and they meet the threshold to start questioning critical issues like budget?
For me, I would go Article 201 direction, public participation, and try and dodge a bit complaining about the parliamentarians, because they have their work, and at times you've seen how parliaments will be run at any one time depending on which government is in power. Then they may take a different direction in doing things, but people's participation is key. So if the right stakeholders are participating in some of these issues, like it's happening right now, then the people will definitely benefit. Now, people in oversight are put in place by the parliamentarians, are put by the electorate, and the institutions that are there to oversee things are also put by the electorate. It's the people who are doing this. So more education and participation by Mwananchi is key. Is even more important than we may be thinking of parliamentarians, but we have a bigger responsibility as the public to ensure that we can be able to speak out and say this is what we want and this is what we don't want.
Rachel, yes, even as you respond to what he's talking about, public participation, it has always been happening, but I want to hear from you, as a tax expert, somebody who has gone to school to understand the laws and the processes of taxation. Is budgeting such a simple assignment that should be left to anyone through public participation?
I would answer yes and no. Number one, where I would say yes is because this is something that affects our lives as individuals, as Kenyans. And in my 2 decades of tax practice, what I've seen is that in the last 2-3 years, public participation has become very key. In fact, when you remember last year, there are people who heard about the finance bill for the first time. And yet, every year we've been having the finance bills. So what I would say when I say yes is because us as Kenyans, we are the people who understand how this tax law is going to affect our particular businesses. And actually now we are the best placed people to come out and say this does not work for us. Like I remember last year and even this year, so many taxpayer organizations would come and demonstrate. In fact, they would come to the committee and tell them, now you want to levy excise duty on this kind of paper. Then if you increase the excise duty, these are the implications. So that's why I say...
Are there views on boarded, at the end of the day?
I would say no.
So is it then an exercise in futility?
In my view, it's not an exercise in futility because their voice has been heard. the voice has been heard.
But not acted upon.
But not acted upon. And you see, that's why, and see, last year, whether heard or not, of course, I do not want to delve into the politics of what happened, just for the simple reason that the people charged with that responsibility were not listening. So now, and we've seen, and in fact, I would say, had and maybe that will influence how the following year budget process is done. Look at the finance bill for the 2025 year of income, and you look at it, you see there are no those major tax increases. We just have ceiling of tax leakages, I mean amendments here and there to just correct drafting errors and such things. We do not have, I mean, those huge tax increases. So you can say, well, depending on where you look at it, they were listened to. Yeah.
Very well. Kamwara, I also want to pick your thoughts on this. I mean, when you look at, you know, the budget, we are talking about 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings, a budget deficit of more than 800 billion shillings. And, you know, again and again, we continue to run our budget on deficit. Don't we learn that it is high time that we started living within our means?
It's a bit unfortunate, mostly when we are borrowing for purposes of recurrent expenditure. Now, if
have we done that yet?
We are actually, at the moment, to cover up our budget deficit, we are forced to borrow. And what are we borrowing for? So if we realize that we are borrowing for purposes of going to pay the current expenditure, which is paying salaries and paying basic things that that could be taken care of by our own money, then it's unfortunate, because the cost of financing is expensive. The money that we're borrowing is not cheap. So it's unfortunate that we continue this way. The only thing that can happen is ensure that we are able to manage our expenditure. If we can be able to cut down our expenditure, and maybe not unnecessary, but our recurrent expenditure, we bring it down, then that way then whatever we are borrowing can be taken to development. And we know that long term, if it's on development, then it will definitely bring its benefits.
Rachel, is it possible for a country to run without a deficit? And what does it mean when a country is running on deficit?
From where I sit, no, but I think that the question is, how big is that deficit?
Ours is 5.1% of our GDP?
I may not have the numbers at the top of my head, but it's about, I think, 800 billion currently. So depending on, and you see now what is happening over the last 2 years, we'll have supplementary budgets. I mean, that has become the norm nowadays. So you find that these are, they're taken to Parliament for approval because things are not working. But how I see it is that when a country continues borrowing, then definitely, even as a person, borrowing is not sustainable. At some point, I think it will become untenable. Yeah. And
I like the issue of supplementary budget, because it is becoming a major norm, you know, budgeting cycles. So people are starting to ask, then, do we really need to budget?
In fact, that's the question. But I guess now the reality of the matter is budget is a plan. A plan can be, you can achieve it or may not, or not achieve it depending on the circumstances and what is happening. You see, now we are budgeting to collect a certain amount of tax revenue. Remember, the only revenue source for government is through taxes. So if Kenyans or these Kenyans,
in aids.
Yeah, which of course doesn't account for a lot of money. So primarily the government depends on taxes. If our economy is not performing well such that taxpayers are not paying the taxes required for whatever reason, then definitely we will be in that kind of cycle.
Very well. Kamwara, as we wind up, what's your final comments?
Predictability is important in any budgeting process and in any process of making laws. Making of the budget is an annual activity. Unfortunately, if at every year goodies will be given and then taken away in the following year, like it is this time, we were given the goodies of incentives of investing, We're told electric cars and electric motor vehicles would come in, very little tax to be paid with it, if no VAT. Now that has changed. People have invested. People thought that we would continue having the incentives on tax benefits, and they're no longer there. They're taken away. Then the budget process becomes an exercise in futility.
Yeah.
Predictability is important. And lastly, transparency is also very important when it comes to budget making process. We can see it coming out. People are allowed to do public participation. But will that public participation be implemented? We are yet to see that, but we are on the right trajectory.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, the two of you, and of course for helping us with your concise analysis.
Thank you.
Your time is highly appreciated.
Okay.
Robert Kamara, a taxation lawyer, and Rachel Jogona, who is an associate director, Ernst & Young, joining us tonight, and of course to put into perspective the budgetary numbers. You're watching the Prime Edition. We are taking a break, and thereafter we'll continue with the more stories.